Week 1 of the 2025 college football season for the Big Ten Conference is now officially complete. We react to everything that we saw during Week 1 for the Big Ten over a 3-day span, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all 18 Big Ten games, and your full reaction on Big Ten Breakdown, all a part of the I-80 Club. A reminder to all of you, you can get that wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, watch the video component of this show each and every time on YouTube at the I-80 Club. If you want all of that outstanding content without a single advertisement, go to patreon.com/I-80 Club. That's I-80 Club to make sure you're following along with everything that we are doing here. The first week of Big Ten football for the 2025 campaign now officially in the books, and this is the first ever rendition of a recap show following the weekend, as we like to call it. If we preview the weekend on a pregame show, I bet you can guess what we call this. It's the Week 1 postgame on Big Ten Breakdown, as we did to preview everything on the pregame show or the 2025 season outlook debut for the Big Ten Breakdown program as well. We like to bring things creatively together, put games all in one, creative topics, but similar storylines and those key moments from each and every matchup from a Big Ten football weekend. We do that here on the postgame show as well. Our first segment will be known as 4 downs. Each and every week, we will highlight 1 through 4, first down being the best of the 4, fourth down being the least of those 4, but still all very good things. We will start with 4 downs, basically our 4 honors of each and every week for the 4 best things we saw from a Big Ten football weekend. Let's start with first down. That's the reigning national champions, Ohio State, starting their title defense, taking down Texas 14-7 at the Horseshoe in Columbus. This game was basically a pick'em, despite the Longhorns being on the road and the Buckeyes starting 2025 at home. It speaks to the strength of Texas, the national championship favorites entering this new year against the reigning national championship winners in Ohio State. And when we talked about concerns or maybe main questions for the Buckeyes in 2025, for me, it wasn't so much Julian Sayin making his first start. It was the change in coordinators, how Brian Hartline would call the plays offensively, and how Matt Patricia would take over on the defensive side of the ball, taking over for Jim Knowles in an Ohio State defense en route to the national championship last year that was the best scoring defense in the country. Well, I think any of those questions have been answered after week number 1. Ohio State's defense was absolutely stifling. And with all of the hype, optimism, and expectation for Arch Manning on the other side, they made Manning look rather pedestrian. 4 critical fourth down stops for Ohio State yesterday. Texas did not score until 3 minutes and 28 seconds remaining in regulation. And Ohio State was able to defeat the number 1 team in the country, albeit in CBUS. But Ohio State was able to knock off the number 1 team in the country, only recording 203 total yards of offense for themselves. And again, it was an Ohio State defense that was tantalizing and tumultuous to Arch Manning all day long, including a key interception late in the third quarter. Ohio State on its ensuing offense possession, 7 plays, 63 yards, capped off by a 40-yard touchdown toss, the first for Julian Sayin in his career to Carnell Tate. For Sayin specifically, 13 of 20, a $126 through the air and a touchdown. Was not asked to do much yesterday, trusting that Ohio State defense, trusting in Matt Patricia's unit, and they certainly did so. It also speaks to what Ryan Day has built and reinforced in this Ohio State program. Of course, you're never going to be able to get over the narrative of playing your biggest rival and losing 4 straight against Michigan, even when you end up atop the pinnacle of college football as a national champion. But since the start of 2024, Ohio State has played 10 total games, 7 of which have come against AP top 10 opponents. Ohio State has won all 7. The Buckeyes are on a nation-long streak of 6 consecutive victories against AP top 10 foes. Ohio State is beating the best on the biggest of stages in those most significant spots, as we saw taking down the number 1 team in the country in Texas. So Ohio State starts its national title defense with a huge victory over the number 1 team in the land, making Arch Manning lose some of that hype behind the train for Texas. That's first down. What is second down? Well, on our pregame show, I told you just based on the programming notes, we would not be able to preview the 4 games on Thursday for Big Ten football, but we would react to everything on our first ever postgame show. And that's where we go for second down. The Nebraska Cornhuskers making a play when it mattered most in winning a single score football game to start 2025. It feels like a sign of things to come. It feels like a turning of the tide. Nebraska got the monkey off its back last year. Bowl eligibility for the first time since 2016. A bowl win for the first time since 2015 in a single score game against Boston College. And how does 2025 begin? It wasn't always pretty in Kansas City at Arrowhead for the Huskers on Thursday night, but it results in a decisive 20-17 win over Cincinnati. Of course, the moment that mattered most. Malcolm Hartzog Jr. picking off Brendan Sorsby with 34 seconds remaining as Cincinnati was driving at Nebraska's 33-yard line and only down by 3. Since he was getting into field goal range on first down, just trailing by 3 points, they seemingly were going to send this to overtime. And in the past 2 years under Matt Rule, in the past 4 or 5 years before that for Nebraska with Scott Frost, this was a game Nebraska would have lost. This was a game that in those critical junctures where the Huskers needed to make a play, where the defense needed to come through with a crucial stop, they wouldn't have. And since he continued to drive down the field and in the Husker territory, it almost felt like, deja vu. We are seeing the same thing. Maybe the idea of year 3 Matt Rule is not going to be actualized. So for Hartzog to make that play in the immediate aftermath of being called for a defensive hold the snap prior, I think shows you this Nebraska program is starting to turn the corner. And again, it wasn't always pretty. In fact, there was a lot of bad. Nebraska allowed 202 rushing yards on the ground, an 8th best rushing defense in the country a year ago under Tony White, but now a new DC, John Butler. They got gashed by Brendan Sorsby in that Bearcats rushing attack. Nebraska controlled the football for more than 39 minutes in time of possession, winning that battle. They forced 2 turnovers. They had the turnover margin 2-zip, and yet they only won by a field goal in that game. Yeah, there are things to be concerned by. But ultimately, to win a 1-score game, making a play to secure that victory, to me, that's a really good sign. 2-11 in 1-score games in the first 13 instances of such under Matt Rule. 2-0 in their last 2. The bowl victory in the Pinstripe Bowl over Boston College, and how you start off 2025 with the win over Cincy. Loved a couple of things we saw from Dana Holgorsen and that offense. Dylan Raiola, 42 pass attempts, 243 yards, 33 completions, by the way, 2 touchdowns. Emmett Johnson bruising back, 25 carries for 108 yards. It wasn't easy, but those were the games Nebraska the last 5 years, the last half decade plus, comes out on the losing end. They made a play when it mattered most to win that one this time to start off the season 1-0 against Cincinnati in KC. That was second down. How about third down? We highlighted in USC's 2025 season prospectus and its opening game against Missouri State, the first for the Bears as an FBS program. USC needs to be cool again. That Lincoln Riley offense that averaged only 30 points per game last year, the worst marks during his 7 full years as a head coach. We needed to see that SC offense fly in Hollywood, and fly they did in the season opener against Missouri State. 73 points scored by Southern Cal to beat Missouri State 73-13. Those 73 points scored by the Trojans on Saturday evening inside the LA Memorial Coliseum. The most for SC since November of 1930. Let me repeat. Since November of 1930. USC scoring the most and putting up the most it had in nearly a century. Jaden Mayava, final 4 games started last year, starts 2025 as Lincoln Riley's quarterback. 15 of 18, 295 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a rushing score. Mayava's rushing touchdown, one of the 6 that Southern Cal had against Missouri State. And Hassan Longstreet, who is probably the quarterback of the future, 2 rushing scores as well in relief duty. 54 yards. USC scores 73 points to earn our third down honors, the most the Trojans have scored in nearly a century. And fourth down, how about it? For the Purdue Boilermakers, starting off the Barry Odom era, blanking Ball State. Purdue winning in Ross-Ade 31-zip. Barry Odom, his first game at the helm of this Purdue program. He is the first Boilermakers head coach to win a debut at Purdue since 2009. And Danny Hope led the Boilers to a victory over Toledo. Also for Purdue, they snapped their 11-game losing skid, basically the final 11 games of 2024. And it was the first shutout for the Boilers of an FBS foe dating back to 2021. Barry Odom putting trust in Ryan Brown, naming the dynamic quarterback his starter. 18 of 26 from Brown, 311 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air, adding a rushing score as well. I know what you're saying. It's Ball State. But heck, Purdue, the only of 5 Big Ten teams that played a MAC-foe to open the season, to cover the number against Ball State. They were a 17.5-point favorite. Purdue blanks Ball State 31-zip to start off 2025. I know it's Ball State, a 3-win team last year, but a great sign for Purdue to begin the Barry Odom era. We talked about it. If Purdue is going to get to 3 or 4 wins this year, this was a season-opening win they must have had, and they absolutely got it in resounding fashion. So Purdue gets our 4th down honor. So all 4 downs of our highest accolades here on the Big Ten Breakdown post-game show. Now we continue for the rest of the recaps that we have from week number 1 of the 2025 season in the Big Ten Conference. Some big numbers put up by Big Ten teams. Let's start on Friday in chronological order. Illinois beats Western Illinois 52-3. The number 12 team in the country with tons of optimism entering this season. Playing an FCS foe to begin. I know, big whoopty. They won by 49, but they were a 45.5-point favorite. That is the expectation set. Illinois covers the number. And what a day for the specialists. Hank Beatty, who had 80 receiving yards, by the way, and 133 punt return yards, including a 69-yard punt return touchdown against the Leathernecks. Speaking of Leathernecks, it harkens the idea of old school football. The 133 punt return yards for Beatty set a new Illinois single game record for return yardage when it comes to punts, a record that stood since 1923. And Red Grange had 125 punt return yards against Nebraska. If you are breaking a record for the Illini that Red Grange set, you have done something historic. And how about our guy, Gabe Akis, one of the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten, one of the best defensive linemen in college football, 2 sacks, strip sack, 2.5 tackles for loss. He is an absolute terror, and that should continue. Illinois has a great week 2 game on the road in Durham against Duke. They're a 2.5-point road favorite inside Wallace Wade. It's going to be a big game. We'll talk about week 2 a little bit later on, and of course our pregame show coming later this week. Oregon routs Montana State, a team that played in the FCS National Championship game just last season. When it comes to the Bobcats, this was a team I thought might be able to mix it up a little bit in Eugene against the Ducks. Was so much new this year for Oregon. I was dead wrong. I thought this game might at least be decided by 4 scores or less. Oregon wins 59-13. And again, it was the start for Dante Moore in Eugene, his first at Oregon. 18 of 23, 213 yards, 3 touchdowns. A little bit different for Will Stein in that offense. They've had experienced quarterbacks the first 3 years of the Dan Lanning era. Bo Nix 2 years in a row, 2022, 2023, and then Dylan Gabriel. So to go to Dante Moore, who had only made 5 starts 2 seasons ago at UCLA, to have him perform that well, comfortably cruise past Montana State, the FCS runner-up from a season ago, I thought spoke to what the Ducks did. Even Puddles losing his lid, the mascot for Oregon, in those pregame entrances did not slow down the Ducks on Saturday. Penn State puts up a big number against Nevada. 46-11, the victory for the Nittany Lions. Nevada scored with 25 seconds remaining in regulation, even got a 2-point conversion. That was really 46-3. Penn State would have covered if that was the case as a 42.5-point favorite. There's really not much to highlight. This is exactly what the Nittany Lions should have done against Jeff Choate and his Wolfpack. Defense looked good. Ground game not overly prolific. Drew Aller consistent. 22 of 26, 217 yards and a touchdown. Basically what Penn State needs to do against their non-con schedule. They have Nevada, FIU, and the FCS foe, albeit in the area, in the Commonwealth, against Villanova. That's what Penn State needs to do. Now, 95-17 as year 12 starts in State College for James Franklin, booked as a favorite with an average margin of victory now nearing 20 points per game. Speaking of teams who are very good as favorites in non-con action. How about Maryland, man? What a great start to 2025 in the Malik Washington era in College Park as that new true freshman quarterback for the Terps. They hammer FAU 39-7. I thought this Owls team, led by Zach Kitley, a new age era of the air raid offense as we see it, coming over from 3 years as the OC at Texas Tech, bringing in the Western Kentucky transfer quarterback Caden Belkamp. I thought FAU could put up some points. The Terps had other ideas. FAU scored midway through the first quarter. That was it. Maryland's defense forces 2 defensive touchdowns, and Malik Washington threw for 3 TDs in his debut in College Park. 39-7. Maryland is now 18-1. 18-1 straight up in non-conference action against those non-conference foes. Again, it's the second best winning percentage nationally, only behind Georgia since Mike Locksley became the head coach way back in 2019. Our next category up after big numbers for Big Ten teams, it goes as such. A win is a win. You started your season perfect. 1-0. What every coach will say you in their coach speak mantra, that is always the goal. Each week, 1-0. A win is a win, but slightly disappointing in the result based on expectation. We start in Bloomington at the Rock for Indiana. They beat Old Dominion 27-14, but as a 23.5-point favorite. And with all of the attention on IU's rather weak non-conference schedule, they won their non-con games last year by more than 45 points per game. You got to absolutely hammer the softer opponents if they are going to be on the slate. IU didn't really do that, winning 27-14, but Colton Joseph, the quarterback for the Monarchs, on the very first play from scrimmage for both of these teams in 2025, a 75-yard scamper to Pater. He had a 78-yard rushing touchdown in the fourth quarter as well. And outside of those 2 big run plays, Indiana's defense was pretty good. The Hoosiers' offense, to me, though, was slightly disappointing, looking a little bit disjointed, never fully smooth, never fully in rhythm. Fernando Mendoza in his Indiana debut, 18 of 31 for only $193. Again, Indiana gets a 2-score win, 27-14. They start 1-0. Kurt Cignetti looked disappointed all Saturday afternoon long in Bloomington, said after the game, I expect so much more out of my team. I expect much more out of Indiana as well. Our second team that qualifies for a win is a win, but slightly disappointing. That's Michigan. They started the Bryce Underwood era with a 17-point win against New Mexico, but the Lobos, under a new head coach in Jason Eck, actually looked a little bit competitive and fiery in that second half inside the Big House. Michigan wins 34-17. Bryce Underwood looked really comfortable. 21 of 31, 251 yards and a touchdown. The Alabama transfer, the tailback Justice Haynes, phenomenal 16 carries, $159 on the ground, and 3 rushing scores. But Michigan really never was fully in front. There was a moment in the third quarter, and we'll talk about the controversial targeting call on the outstanding defensive player for the Maize and Blue and Jayshon Barham. Looked like he recorded a script sack, picked it up, took it back himself for a fumble return touchdown and a hard hit against Jack Lane, that New Mexico quarterback. They were reviewing it to see if it was actually a fumble. Turned out that Lane was on the ground, would have been ruled down by contact. But in that review, also awarded a targeting call against Jayshon Barham. And because that happened in the third quarter, second half for Michigan, Barham's going to be suspended for the opening half, although Michigan and Sharon Moore set to appeal that ruling. Jayshon Barham's set to be suspended for the opening half on the road against Oklahoma in Norman for this huge non-conference matchup for Michigan. Should be a top 20 tilt next Saturday night. And the Maize and Blue, now a 5.5-point underdog on the road against the Sooners. Again, Bryce Underwood comfortable. Rushing attack looked good behind that offensive line that really only has 2 guys with a ton of starting experience in Gio El-Hadi and Greg Crippen right there as your center spot. Just not overwhelming. When you're a 35-point favorite against New Mexico and you only win by 17, it's going to lead to a win is a win, but slightly disappointing. The controversial targeting call against Jayshon Barham and its repercussions, perhaps, for that marquee matchup in Norman Saturday night in primetime. Not exactly going to leave the sweetest taste in the mouth of Wolverines backers. The next team that qualifies for a win is a win, but slightly disappointing. That's Iowa against Albany, the FCS foe. 34-7 the win for the Hawkeyes, but again, at Kinnick, 39.5-point favorite to only win by 27. Not great. Let's start with the accolades. Kirk Ferentz wins the 205th game in his career. He matches Woody Hayes for the most career victories for Big Ten head coaches as Cy-Hawk is on the horizon against Iowa State in Ames this upcoming week. What a way it could be to set the all-time Big Ten record for the most wins with 206. Iowa, by the way, booked as a slight underdog against the Cyclones, who looked really good against South Dakota week number 1. Kirk gets win number 205. But we were also excited by what this Iowa offense can be after a successful, at least by Iowa City standards, debut season for Tim Lester as that offensive coordinator and bringing in the FCS two-time national champion and FCS player of the year 2 years ago, Mark Gronowski. Call it what it is. He was underwhelming in a big way. 8 of 15 for 44 yards and a touchdown. On the opening offensive drive for Iowa, he had multiple guys wide open. Certainly on one pass, I believe, to Sam Phillips, wide open by himself, nobody even near in the end zone. And Mark Gronowski on a bootleg just absolutely threw a duck and underthrew it. Not the debut we were expecting for Iowa's new quarterback. We all assumed that Mark Gronowski would probably be the best we have seen at the quarterback spot for Iowa since the days of Nate Stanley. Not the most impressive beginning to his Iowa City career. But Iowa led the Big Ten in rushing yards last year, more than 197 on the ground per game for the first time since 1960. They put up 310 yards on the ground against Albany. Kamari Moulton, who entered as RB1 for this Iowa backfield, replacing Caleb Johnson and all of that production from last year, did leave the game in the opening half injured. Kirk Ferentz said it is what it is. We'll see what his status is against Iowa State for week number 2. Our final team that falls into a win is a win, but slightly disappointing, is Washington. They beat Colorado State 38-21. You win by 17, great, but you're a 22.5-point home favorite inside Husky Stadium. But this game was close. Tied midway at 21 through the third quarter between Washington and CSU. Good for the Huskies. They scored 17 straight. And we talked about Jonah Coleman in this offense with Damon Williams, who looked clean and crisp under Jed Fish's system in his 2025 debut, just his third career start as he now takes over the reins of this UW offense. But Jonah Coleman, man, one of 9 running backs last year in the Big Ten with at least 1,000 yards on the ground. How about 24 attempts for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns? That's reliability and consistency in the backfield for Washington. They look good pulling away in the final 20-plus minutes of that game against Colorado State. And a pretty good Rams team that won 8 games a season ago with returning talent at the quarterback and Braden Fowler-Nicolosi. But again, not overwhelming. Washington enters this year with a lot of optimism as well to maybe be an 8-9 teams flying under the radar in the Big Ten. Could they maybe be a conference contender? I don't think that's going to prove to anybody that Washington has that ceiling. But again, good play out of your backfield. Damon Williams at the quarterback spot. Jonah Coleman, 177 yards on the ground and 2 scores. So that was the category. Win is a win, but slightly disappointing. Now let's get to a theme for week 1 in Big Ten football. The Big Ten in the MAC. We saw 5 total games this weekend between these 2 conferences. Purdue, the only team, not just to win outright, but also cover. The Big Ten was perfect straight up, 5-0 against its MAC foes, but the Boilers early on Saturday, blanking Ball State 31-zip, the only team to cover against their MAC opponent this weekend. The 4 teams that played MAC foes, 3 on Thursday, 1 on Friday, failed to cover a number. Let's run through each and every result. Rutgers was the first up. 6 p.m. Eastern time kick in Piscataway on Thursday. For all that we were unable to preview of those quadruple header of games in Big Ten country on Thursday, we react and recap it here on the Big Ten Breakdown post-game show. Rutgers escapes against an Ohio team that won the Mid-American Conference a year ago. New era, though, for the Bobcats. Same quarterback, Parker Navarro, throwing 3 touchdowns. Timothy Chalamet's favorite college football player. This game was tied at 31 apiece late in the third quarter in Piscataway. Rutgers takes over, puts together a drive. Jay Patel, a 26-yard field goal with about 11 minutes remaining. That ended up being the game winner for the Scarlet Knights. Again, Rutgers was a 16.5-point home favorite against Ohio. I think we understand how good the Bobcats actually are in terms of what they do and what their pedigree has been. Double-digit win seasons under Tim Albin, who is now at Charlotte the last 2 years, a MAC championship a season ago, and Parker Navarro brings back consistency at the QB spot. But for Rutgers to only win by 3 in a high-scoring affair, probably not the way that you expected things to go for the Scarlet Knights at the beginning. Ethan Kaliak-Manis, great. Antoine Raymond, great in the backfield as well. Defense that lost a lot of that returning talent. That was one of the reasons we were all so high on the Scarlet Knights entering 2024. A little bit of work to be done so far in Piscataway with a new defensive coordinator as well in the mix. Let's go to our next Big Ten versus MAC game from Thursday night. Minnesota rowing the boat at home, just winning as they always do under PJ Fleck, but not covering, as we'll talk about in just a minute. I was really excited for this game. The Golden Gophers, an 8-win team last year, taking on a Buffalo team that won 9 games a season ago. Really intrigued to see what Drake Lindsey would look like in his first career start in the Twin Cities. Only 5 pass attempts a season ago. The freshman from Fayetteville, Arkansas. He was great. Minnesota wins 23-10. But again, when you are booked as an 18.5-point favorite and you win by just 2 touchdowns, unable to cover a number, you're going to leave a few bettors a little bit disappointed, as we will share in just a moment. Drake Lindsey, though, in his first career start, 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. We told you in the Big Ten Breakdown pregame show, or at least kind of that perspective for 2025 for the Gophers, that Drake Lindsey, breaking in a new quarterback alongside a really dynamic backfield led by Darius Taylor, was going to be able to learn comfortably how this all goes. And we saw that on full display. Darius Taylor, the workhorse against the Bulls, 30 carries, 141 yards, 36 receiving yards as well. And one of the reasons Minnesota did not cover, PJ Fleck just said, hey, let's win this game by 2 touchdowns and get out of Dodge. Perfect 1-0. Let's dominate the clock at the end. Minnesota ran out the clock to ice away the victory against Buffalo. The final possession of the game, 16 plays, 15 of which were runs, 58 yards, 9 minutes and 45 seconds time of possession on that drive. Did not cover, but Minnesota wins comfortably. Really impressed by Drake Lindsey. Really impressed by that Minnesota defense. Danny Collins, the new DC, has worked in the Twin Cities for the last half decade as the safeties coach, but taking over for the talented Corey Hetherman. Loved what I saw out of the Golden Gophers. Again, I'm not shocked if Minnesota wins 8 games once again this year, as they have 3 of the previous 4 seasons under PJ Fleck. That's how they get it done in week number 1 over Buffalo. Really scary early in Madison on Thursday night to begin year number 3 of the Luke Fickell era. We have talked about how daunting and how difficult the schedule is for the Badgers. What will expectations look like after a 5-7 record a year ago and snapping the 22-year bowl streak? Well, things got dicey quick inside Camp Randall late in the opening half against Miami, Ohio. Billy Edwards Jr., all the experience he brings over from Maryland, left the game with a non-contact injury. Anytime it's a non-contact injury, specifically to the knees, you always think the absolute worst. Billy Edwards came back out in the second half, albeit ruled out for the game in sweats, cheering on his team from the sidelines. And the initial prognosis is timetable still not necessarily set for his return, but it is not feared to be a season-ending or long-term injury for Billy Edwards. Now to the actual result of the game, Wisconsin plagues the Redhawks 17-0, knocking off Miami, a team under Chuck Martin that's been great and played in that MAC championship game just a season ago. Wisconsin only led 3-0 at the end of the opening half. They scored 14 straight in that second half, and they post the first shutout of the Luke Fickell era. Mike Tressel, the third-year defensive coordinator for Wisconsin, really good showing for his group, putting Miami's offense under constant duress. DeQuan Finn, the Toledo transfer, was really hounded all night, pressured in that backfield anytime he dropped back to pass. Danny O'Neal, comfortable in the second half, guiding the Wisconsin offense to exactly what it needed as the onus was on the defense, and they came through with flying colors. Really love the big body of Dylan Jones. I think we've got a star in the making in the backfield for that Wisconsin offense. And fourth and finally from Thursday and Friday night for the Big Ten versus the MAC was Michigan State. They rolled over Western Michigan, in-state foe. Michigan State now starts on a Friday for the 11th time in the last 15 years, and they're perfect 11-0 to begin their seasons on a Friday night in the last decade and a half, but do not cover against the Broncos. 23-6 to win for Jonathan Smith and company, starting off year number 2 for Smith as the head man in East Lansing. But the Spartans led 21-0 at the break. They looked very fluid offensively. Aiden Childs delivering the football. Touchdown pass to Nick Marsh. Mekhi Frazier taking over as that lead back. 14 carries, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Michigan State forced a safety early on in the third quarter. and they never scored again. So they led 21-0 at the break, but did not score offensively and frankly looked out of rhythm in that second half. Not what you want to see out of an offense that I am trying to highlight here for Aiden Childs and a very deep receiver core. Touchdown toss to Nick Marsh and more than 50 yards, Omari Kelly. Aiden Childs' top target. Again, 17-point win. Comfortable, never in doubt. But when you're booked as a 21-point home favorite, you got to match expectation. And to not score an offensive point in the second half, not exactly the best offensive showing out of Sparty on Friday night against Western Michigan. Those 4 games between the MAC and the Big Ten on Friday. The Big Ten was perfect. In fact, perfect all weekend, including Purdue blanking Ball State 5-0 against the Mid-American Conference. But the Oilers, the only team to cover the number against the MAC during week number 1. Let's end out the show with probably the most negative will be about any Big Ten program from week number 1. This category known on the Big Ten Breakdown postgame is just straight bad. And that's what it was for both Northwestern and UCLA in a couple of really good non-con matchups to start off week number 1. We start with the Cats on the road in New Orleans. They get hammered by Tulane. The Green Wave winning comfortably 23-3. Northwestern did not score in the final 3 quarters. Northwestern allowed 260 rushing yards to Tulane, and their new quarterback, Jake Retzloff, putting up 113 on the ground himself and a touchdown. And when you're bringing in a transfer quarterback that has played in New Orleans before, the SMU transfer in Preston Stone, with his experience, you're hoping for consistency at the very least in the quarterback spot. Nope. 19 of 36 for Stone in his Northwestern debut, only 161 yards. But this is the worst part. 4 interceptions out of Preston Stone. Northwestern did not score in the final 45 minutes. Not good. And then after the game, John Sumrall revealing that Tulane was trying to wear their special white uniforms they wore back in 2005 in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Now in the 20-year anniversary of Katrina, they requested that they would wear the home white uniforms. Northwestern denied said request, and John Sumrall said, if you disrespect New Orleans, you are disrespecting Tulane. And they laid it on Northwestern. Not a good start optically, narrative-wise, performance-wise for Northwestern in 2025. I think the Cats can be pesky, probably booked as an underdog often throughout this campaign. Year number 3 under David Braun. Not the way you wanted to start after a 3-win season in 2024. And also speaking of just straight bad, this one I kind of predicted, and I think I offered up to you. Utah minus 5.5 in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena for the first start for Nico Iamaleava as UCLA's quarterback. That's exactly what happened, man. Utah laying the wood on the Bruins in Pasadena late Saturday night, 43-10. The Utes victorious. Devin Dampier, the new quarterback in Salt Lake, following his offensive coordinator from New Mexico to Utah in Jason Beck, did not skip a beat. 206 passing yards, 2 passing scores, 87 yards on the ground, and a touchdown. 3 total TDs for Utah's new quarterback. Keep an eye on Devin Dampier and that offense. Utah scoring 40-plus for the first time since the start of the 2023 season. Last year, the Utes were 5-7. That's an aberration for the standard that Kyle Whittingham has set for 20-plus years at the helm of this Utah Utes football program. UCLA found out the hard way in game number 1 of year number 2 for Deshaun Foster. I am not necessarily confident in Iamaleava. And I think we saw a little bit of that, right? Where it's not all on him with how things played out on Saturday night. But 11 of 22, 136 yards, a touchdown to an interception. Was UCLA's leading rusher, which is not how I'm sure the Bruins want to conduct their offensive scheme moving forward. First time for Tino Sunseri as a play caller in Pasadena, and not a great result. 43-10. UCLA gets lambasted by Utah week number 1. So that will do it for all of our recaps from the week 1 Big Ten slate. All 18 games, I hope, put creatively in topics, bringing it all together, having some fun, giving you all the details and those key and most important notes that you must know from every single weekend around the Big Ten Conference. Big Ten Breakdown will be back on Friday, of course, for our pregame show, getting you ready for an outstanding week 2 slate in the Big Ten. I mean, we really have some outstanding non-conference games, Big Ten versus Power Conference foes on the other side. We've got the Cy-Hawk Trophy game between Iowa and Iowa State in Jack Trice in Ames. That's a 2.5-point spread in favor of the Clones. We've got Illinois on the road in at Duke in Durham. Illinois booked as a 2.5-point favorite. You want to be a 10-win team? You want to reach the college football playoff? This is a resume booster Brett Bielema and company must have. And, of course, the game in prime time that will get all of our eyeballs. Michigan, Oklahoma should be a top 20, if not a top 15 tilt by the time we reach Saturday night in Norman. Sharon Moore against his alma mater. Again, we'll get to all of that more than likely. That's the Big Ten game of the week in week number 2 here on Big Ten Breakdown. A reminder, make sure you subscribe, you follow, you like. You're following I-80 Club on X. I will always call it Twitter. You're getting this wherever you get your podcasts. You're following along for all the great content the I-80 Club is producing on YouTube. And if you want all of this great stuff, ad-free, patreon.com/I-80 Club. That's I-80 Club. That does it for the first ever Big Ten Breakdown post-game show. We'll talk later in the week. This show comes out on Monday. We'll talk later in the week. Hope you enjoyed your Labor Day and holiday weekend. I hope you enjoyed week number 1 of the 2025 Big Ten football season. I'm Ben Stevens. We'll talk to you ahead of week 2 on the pregame show here on Big Ten Breakdown.